Welcome to Global Citizen Life podcast. Today on the show, we have Cordelia, who is currently living in Portugal. So, welcome, Cordelia.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
So, first question, why Portugal?
So I'm from the US is where I spent my most of my life, and that's where I was born. And Portugal has a very manageable immigration policy as countries in Europe go. It's relatively affordable and not just the lifestyle, but the actual process of immigrating. And so our ultimate goal is to become Portuguese citizens and to have our son be a Portuguese citizen. So this was originally chosen because it was sort of the path of least resistance, but now that we've lived here for a year, we love it so much here, and I'm so grateful that we're here.
That's fantastic. And, I always say to people, there's not one perfect place, right?
Mm-mm.
Like there's people could go to many places and like all of them, or they'll have things that they like or maybe don't like about it. When you went to Portugal, how many cities did you check out or consider? Did you move around and look at a few before you settled down, or did you kind of come in blind and say, this is it, we're going to make it work? And you did.
So one of the things I think when I was started originally researching, because we knew we wanted to expatriate and live in Europe, is everybody says it depends. Well, what do we, what, and you're so frustrated. I was so frustrated because I just wanted the answer, but it really does truly depend on your situation. And there's so many factors. We originally looked at the Netherlands, but we actually came here with my 82-year-old father, who is a retiree. And the Netherlands does have a treaty with the US, but they only take people who are business owners or workers. They don't take retirees. So that was like checked off the list. But then once we honed in on Portugal, for us, we have a child in school. And so school was a big factor for us. And we also were, honestly, we're kind of boring people. So, and we've traveled and lived in enough different places to know that we're not necessarily going to change. Like we lived in New York City and never went anywhere, and our day-to-day life is pretty modest, and that has been consistent everywhere we lived. And so I didn't really want to live in Lisbon or Porto because those are such, I just don't like living in a big city. I didn't like living in New York, and it just wasn't for me. Even when we lived in Atlanta, we were kind of in the suburbs. They say, are you a city girl or a country girl? And I'm like, I like the suburbs. I like to be able to park in a parking lot and go to the grocery store. And, so that part of life I really wanted to replicate here. And so we chose a town called Caldas de Rainha, which is about an hour north of Lisbon. So we're still really close to Lisbon. We can get to the airport. It has a great private Portuguese school here. There's great public schools. And it's not a huge tourist destination. So there's not this like huge influx of cruise ships and tour buses in the peak season, which some people who live in more touristy areas kind of have to contend with. I mean, people come, there's stuff to do if you visit, but nobody's flying across the ocean to come to our town. They're just here because they're on the way somewhere or they're visiting a friend.
And those are some very good points to make, even though I understand how it can be frustrating to be like, well, where should I go? Because when we think of the I can go anywhere, like
Mhm.
that's just so overwhelming. And of course we can't quite go anywhere. There's places we are obviously don't want to go, can't go type things. But knowing yourself is really, really important. And knowing that, you don't want the big touristy cities that are really busy and those places cost more money. Why
They do.
pay for a lifestyle that you don't enjoy or use or take advantage of? Right. And so it's nice that you are very aware of that about yourself. And being an hour away from Lisbon is very easy. It's not really that far. And so I say to people all the time is you really have to know yourself. What do you like to do? What do you want to do? What are your hobbies, activities, your lifestyle? What don't you like? And I feel the same way because being in Barcelona, when I'm not there for a long time and I've been gone, I go back and I love it and it's great. And there's lots of people and my friends and everything. And then after a little while, I think, oh, there's so many people and tourists. And then I don't like it. And luckily for me, though, because of the life I've designed, then I leave and I go to
Right.
Montenegro usually or travel. And I love Montenegro and it's great. And it's generally quieter, except for the influx of July and August for the summer. But then at the same point, at times I go, oh, it's too quiet. I need to get back to Barcelona or go somewhere. So I have that kind of back and forth that works for me. But it is very important to know you and what you like. You've been there, you said, for about a year now. So what have you found are some, let's start with the challenges. What have you found have maybe been some of the challenges or things that you're like, ooh, I didn't quite think about that when I moved?
Well, living in a foreign country and visiting a foreign country are very different. And I had the only time I had ever lived abroad was when I was a student, which is also very different because you're not really living. I mean, I was a college student, it was different, right? It wasn't true life. So it's there are these moments that just it hits you and like, or it hits me, and I'm just like, I can't, like, I needed to find something out because so the other thing is I've had some health issues since we moved here and I had to have surgery. So just like navigating all that. And then I had knee surgery. So I haven't been able to walk a whole lot, which, everybody says, oh, come to Europe. You can walk everywhere and walk, 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 walk to, I get 10,000 steps before 9 a.m. And I was like, well, I'm just like, can't do any of that. So that was a big challenge, was just dealing with this knee injury. And then I had to start swimming because it's rehab for my knee. And nothing's online here. Like none of the businesses, like if they have hours, are most likely not accurate. Like the gyms don't have class, like nothing is online. So you have to just go places and find out. So, and I'm a pretty extroverted, confident person, but it took me a good month before I just like had the bandwidth to deal with the swimming pool and just go in, find out when everything is, stumble through in my Portuguese and ask if they have English. And I do speak some Portuguese now after a year, but it's not great. And then there was another pool, and it was like, well, I got to drive across town and go in there and find out when their hours. And so little things just kind of creep up on you that when you're a tourist, it's different. Even if you stay for like a couple months, you still know that it's like a temporary place. And so it's been challenging. And then also just real life continues, right? Like if you have anxiety or depression or health issues or challenging family relationships or your whatever your thing is, right? Like whatever your deal is, you have that doesn't just like go away because you're in a foreign country. In fact, sometimes it's worse and having to deal with, a health diagnosis, any of that stuff. The language trouble, the cultural differences, it just layers on. And it can be really challenging.
Absolutely. It's somebody was I was talking with a woman who was on my summit I had a while ago, and she said, and she's in Florence in Italy, and I love Italy, but she said, it's not under the Tuscan sun. She's like, it's
Right.
hard. It's TV makes it sound easy. We look at videos on YouTube and all of this. And of course, you look at any social media, and a lot of it is rainbows and butterflies. And there's even companies out there, oh yeah, we'll help you move, relocate. You can go here, there, and rainbows and butterflies. It's all good. It's all
Mhm.
everything. And I always say, if there's rainbows and butterflies, where are the unicorns?
Yeah.
Because there are always challenges. And language, number one, even, unless you are completely fluent, then okay, that's different. But there's still the day-to-day how things are done, and things are done very differently in different countries. And sometimes I've had experiences that I just shake my head and I just think this makes absolutely no sense. But to them in the country, they're like, well, this is the way it's done. It makes sense. It's the way we do it. And you
So,
just
I think
have
there's a
to
just,
adapt.
yes, and I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt
It's
you.
okay. It's
I
okay.
was gonna say, I think there's a difference too between language and culture. And so,
Yes.
a couple things about that. One, even if you go into, say, a bank and the person speaks English, the things that are cultural are not going to be different just because you're sharing a language, right? Like,
Mhm.
why wouldn't you have to come to the bank 3 times to get everything working and spend 2 hours each time? Like that's just what you do. And I'm like, why can't this be, can't you just email me, or whatever? They were like, no. And then the other thing is that this was a real surprise to me. And part of this is because I have a teenager. And so we have we are in a wonderful community of international parents. And this was definitely my own American ignorance. I truly underestimated even the diversity of the English speaking community. Like, I really just thought everybody was going to be American and British or maybe Australian. Like, it was, but the English speaking community is just as diverse as I mean, we people from all over the world speak English. And so when we're in a
Right.
social gathering of any kind, just because we're all speaking English, there could be 20 different cultures present. And cultural differences are a big deal. And so somebody will say something and you're like, I don't understand that. Or maybe they seem like they're being rude. And it's like,
Mm.
well, I don't think they're really being rude. I think that just it's a cultural difference. Colloquialisms are different. All that stuff is different. So just because you all speak English doesn't necessarily magically mean that everybody's like on the same page.
That is a very, very good point to make. Because it is, English is kind of that international business
Mhm.
language, and many people do speak it. And you're right. When I think of friends that I have in different countries, and how many speak English, of course, and all the countries they're from the Philippines to South Korea, of course,
Exactly.
North America,
All over
UK,
Europe.
everything, all over Europe.
Hmm.
And culturally, yeah, I've like when I'm in Montenegro, I remember I was at the bank. I just wanted to pay some bills. And I felt like the lady was yelling at me and she was angry at me. And I was just like, oh, and she's like, no, you have to put it in your account first, the money, and then we take it out because then it saves you money. It's better for you. And I was like, oh, okay, okay, okay. That, yeah, however, it's better. And so I thought she was angry with me, but then as I was watching other people, it's just they're very direct and
Hmm.
very to the point, and and she wasn't angry at all. Like, and it just because that was my interpretation.
Right.
And I've seen her many other times at the bank, and now I know. But
Right.
even, it can be very, very different with cultures as well, even as you said, not take out the language.
Yeah, I mean, like in Portugal, this surprised me. Things that in America we wouldn't ask a stranger or somebody we don't know well. Like
Hmm.
in America, there's a thing like you never ask a woman how old she is, right?
Hmm.
Here, they'll just in the first 10 minutes, you're sitting around in a circle and they're like, everybody say your name and where you're from and how old you are. And I'm like, what? Or whatever. Like, it's just like in my Portuguese class, that was like on day one, like everybody was supposed to go around and say how old they were. And it's just in Portuguese culture, it's not a big deal to talk about your age.
Right.
So just, you have to get over it. Or like the other thing that's funny here is people are a lot less uptight about their bodies.
Mm.
And even though intellectually, I think that's fantastic. When I went to swim class and I was in the locker room after swim class, I was like everybody was naked and taking showers
That's
and walking around, and I felt super like an uptight American. I was like, oh my God, this is too much for me. So it's just those moments when you're traveling and it seems like a novelty, when you're living there, it's a lot sometimes because you're everything you do from the minute you get up until some days everything's foreign, and it's like a mental it's a mental load. You're unexpectedly exhausted because you went to the
Mhm.
grocery store, but it was like you had to talk to somebody and you had to read a bunch of labels and you had to figure out different cuts of meat, and then you're ready to take a nap. It's a lot some days.
I think too, it's interesting in a way, it must be how kids feel. Like, if and we don't realize it because, as you're a kid and you're going to school and you're learning and you're doing new things, just learning for the first time. And how, I guess, how some kids have temper tantrums, breakdowns, whatever label, title we want to call it. And now that I've moved several times and I've done it, like I can almost understand, because not understanding what's going on, not being able to communicate how I feel, what I want, what I need, it can become so frustrating. And you're
It
right,
really
it's
can.
so different when we're on vacation because we might kind of get frustrated. We're like, whatever, it's okay. Like I'll
Right.
just deal with it because I'm here for a week or a month or whatever that time frame. And it can be overload, just an emotional, mental overload. And a friend of mine, we were in India, but we were only there for 3 weeks, so we were on vacation. And well, not yeah, it was kind of vacation. But anyway, she one day she just said, you know what? We had a day that we didn't have to do anything, and she's like, I'm not doing India today. I'm like, what do you mean you're not doing in like we are in India? How? She's like, I'm not leaving the hotel room. I'm not
Mhm.
leaving. I am not doing it. I'm just staying in. I'll order food. I don't care. I am not doing India today.
People
And
are
I
so
get that.
snotty about McDonald's. Like, I hear a lot of people who are travelers being super, super snobby about McDonald's. I eat at McDonald's more now than I ever did in the United States because there's just days when I can't take it anymore and I'm just hungry and I don't want to talk to anyone and I don't want something and I don't want to have to figure out, is this Portuguese lunch time? Is this, because they eat
Mm.
at different times.
Oh
I
yeah.
just don't want to deal with any of it. But I have days like living in Portugal where I don't want to do Portugal. I'm like, I'm gonna go to
Hmm.
McDonald's and come home and then like that's it. That's all I can deal with today.
It's that familiarity.
Mhm.
Sometimes it's just having something that's familiar that we know. We just want to give our brain a break, give ourselves a break, and have that familiarity. So with Portugal, I know in every country is a little bit different. So what are the normal kind of eating times in Portugal?
So breakfast is not a big meal here. So they tend to just eat like a piece of bread or something very light for breakfast, which is very not the way Americans are. Like in America, you're taught like breakfast is the most important meal of the day, right? So that's a big one, is just there's so many days and it's a little different if you live in Lisbon or Porto because there's just more restaurants, but it's like I'm like, oh, I really want to go out for breakfast. And it's like, well, I really don't feel like having a ham sandwich. So I think I'll just stay home. So that's breakfast. And in general, the culture goes later. It's not as late as Spain. So 8:30 to 9:30, I would say, is breakfast time on a weekday. But whereas like if you're in New York or even London, and if you're up at like 6 a.m. in London and you want to go out and get a cup of coffee, like there will be many places already opening up at 6 a.m. That is not going to happen in Portugal. Like just stuff does even coffee places don't open before like 9:30 or 10, it's just not, they're not morning people. And then lunch is around 1:30, and then dinner is 7:30ish, you know,
Mhm.
7:38, I would
Right.
say.
And those aren't too bad for times, because as you know too, like Spain is late. Same thing with
Mhm.
breakfast. They're not really big on breakfast. Grab a croissant, something like that, bread. Um, Lunch is usually about, I would say about around 1:30-ish as well. Sometimes two it'll start, but it usually goes for an hour and a half to 2 hours is lunch, and that's normal. And then the big difference is dinner, like 10 o'clock at night. I'm
Yeah,
like,
I lived in
this
Spain
is
for a little while.
crazy.
I could never get used to that like late night dinner. It just
No.
never worked for me.
It doesn't for me either, but if I do go with friends and they want to go late, I'll have like, I guess, a first dinner or my normal kind of dinner,
Mhm.
but something small and light, because then when I go with them, I will just have an appetizer, or lots of times when I go with friends, we just share stuff. So I'll
Mhm.
just have a few little bits, and they don't, that's one thing that's very different too, is dinner's not a huge heavy meal. It is more sharing. Lunch is the biggest
Right.
kind of meal of the day, and then dinner is smaller and sharing. And so yeah, I just can't eat that late. It doesn't really work for me to have too much. I don't really like it. But they're up late, and then they'll go for a walk for an hour after
Right.
dinner. And I think too, because for most of the year, like Spain gets really hot. In some areas, like it gets really hot. And so you can't be outside for most of the day. And so that's why the dinner is late, because then it's finally cooling off. You can go out, enjoy things,
Mhm.
have dinner, go for walks, and you're not going to die of the heat.
Right. So yeah, the Portuguese culture is earlier than Spain, which works for
Mm.
me, but um and then we of course at home we try to keep Portuguese meal times because it's just it makes, especially because we have a child who's like eating school lunch, and like it's better for him if he's just used to those meal times. And so we kind of tried to, when we had jet lag and we were adapting anyway, we kind of just tried to go all in on the meal times just to get used to it.
Right. And it makes sense. That's a part of integrating. Do you find that Portugal has more holidays than North America? Because I found in Spain, especially, there just seemed to be every month was some type of bank holiday or national holiday or local Catalonia holiday. And sometimes it was hard to keep track of what was just local to the region, what was the national bank holiday, but there always seemed to be holidays.
There definitely are a lot of holidays, and honestly, I don't know if there's more, but they're so different that it's just very noted. Portugal, like Spain, is a Catholic country, and
Right.
so they get all the major Catholic holidays off. Now, a lot of people here are secular. So even though it's a Catholic country, it's not like Americans think of as religious right or anything like that. It's very
Mhm.
liberal. Nobody cares about gay people or anything like it's just, it's very chill. But they do have the Catholic holidays off. A lot of people don't do any, just like in America when you have, Memorial Day, not everybody's going to the veterans
Right.
cemetery. Other people are just having picnics. So it's kind of the same thing here, people are kind of doing their own thing on the holidays. I will say again, because I have a kid in school, it makes it a little bit easier for me to keep track of those holidays because
Right.
he's off those days. But like this summer, there was just a holiday here last week, the Assumption of Mary, and it blindsided me because he's off, it's summer break, and I
Mhm.
was like, and it's only relevant if you want to go to the bank or, do something
Right.
official, government oriented. Most grocery
Mhm.
stores are open 7 days here. So, it's not like maybe 30 or 40 years ago when you couldn't go to the market on Sundays. And I think in Germany, still like they don't have markets open on Sundays. I've heard, but I haven't seen that.
Spain generally doesn't. There's some of the smaller shops and grocery stores that will open Sunday, but not all of them. Some of the bigger ones are closed on Sundays, and a lot of area of Spain still has siesta time where things are closed in the afternoon for hours, banks and things like that. So when I first moved to Barcelona, I had some adjusting because I like to get up in the morning, do some work, and then go out, run some errands, do what I need to do, and then come back and then I would do more work. And I it just it never really worked for me because lots of times I would go and the shop or the store would be closed and I would think, I gotta come back later or, and I did it multiple times. So yeah, that was definitely some adjusting there. Now, what about finding a home? How challenging was it? And kind of what are the price and prices are hard, but if you were to compare what you have there in Portugal compared to the same thing back in Atlanta or maybe New York where you lived before, what is that kind of price comparison and availability?
Well, real estate, right? It's complicated.
Hmm.
We did buy an apartment here. So we did when we were before we moved here, we purchased property. Um, we downsized.
Okay.
So in the US, we had like the suburban life. We lived in a house in the suburbs, we had two cars, we had a big yard, we had a lot of, suburbanness, I guess.
Mm.
So we about a year before we moved, we downsized to one car. Coincidentally, kind of because I have an older son and he needed a car. So we just were like, well, just take this one and we'll live with one car to kind of get used to Portugal. And
Hmm.
then,
Yeah.
um, but so it's hard to say because obviously our 3-bedroom apartment here is less than our, 4.5 bedroom house was in
Right.
Atlanta. And then like I said, we're kind of in a smaller town. So
Mm.
you can buy like an apartment here for like around 200, I'm gonna just call it $200,000.
Okay.
It might be a little more, it might be a little bit less, depending on where
Of
you live
course.
in the town we're in, which is ridiculously high for this town. Like 5 years ago, you could have bought a place for like $100,000. Like it was a
Wow.
big difference in price.
Mhm.
Um, and then obviously, if you want like a house with like a yard, it's more. And then it depends how updated you wanted it. Like
Right.
construction here, I wanted a place that we did not have to do anything to. So our apartment came fully furnished. Like literally we walked off the airplane into the apartment and we could start living here. Um,
Okay.
Now some of that was just luck. I'd like to tell you it's because I was so good at house hunting, but honestly, the previous owner he totally outfitted this place with custom furniture that only fit here, and he wanted new furniture in his new house. So it was
Okay.
a coincidence, right? So
Mhm.
we have definitely replaced some things, but none of it. It was all just to our taste. We had everything we needed right off the bat. But
Okay.
it's one thing I will say is there is a perception, at least in America, that if you pay enough money that you're gonna buy your way out of problems, right? Like, well, if I pay the right consultant or if I buy the right expensive house and it's not really like that here. Like it kind of is. Obviously, if you buy something a little bit nicer, it's gonna maybe have less problems, but there's people who've bought, very expensive houses that they didn't really know what they were doing because they thought they could buy their way out of the learning cycle. And then they had horrible, expensive problems with their houses. So you still really have to learn. And we came here in November, which is not the nicest time of year here. It
Mhm.
was raining and yucky, and we did not have a good tourist experience, but we wanted to feel what it would feel like to live here. So we can't, and it also coincided with Thanksgiving break, which isn't a holiday here. So we got a good 3 week, trip in. And I'll tell you what, looking at an apartment or a house when it's like sunny and gorgeous, and you're like, this is the best place on earth. But when you look at that
Course.
same place, when it's like dank and rainy and disgusting, and you see the water dripping down and you smell the
Mm.
mold, like there were some places I just walked in and I was like, we can just leave right now. Like it was so
Mhm.
disgusting there. And I don't think I would have been able to, like, this place was really nice even when it was raining.
And that it really is a good point to bring up that if you are looking even renting, buying, whatever it may be, even just doing some trips to see if you like the country, go in the worst season. And whatever that could be. For some people, maybe the worst season is summer because it's so
Right.
hot and they don't like the heat. If that's your worst season, that's when you need to go. If they get a ton of rain and wind and whatever else, that's when you need to go because you need to know, do I even like this place during the worst season? Or do I plan on being gone during the worst season? Like then fine. But then
Right.
also, how does the apartment or the house hold up? As you said, is there water running in? Is it because it's now moist and wet? Do you smell the mold? Because middle of summer, things kind of dry out and you don't notice.
Yep.
So that's a very good time to go house hunting if you can, is during that worst weather season that they have.
And the other thing I think a lot of us learned during COVID is that because you saw this like in New York and cities where places where people mostly like didn't spend a lot of time in their home
Right.
normally. They would be out a lot at work and out eating out, and they lived kind of that lifestyle.
Mhm.
And then COVID hit and they were like, oh my God, why am I in this closet all the time? So that definitely colored my perceptions too. Like there was a level of adaptation that I was like, look, something could happen and we might like be stuck in this apartment and in this neighborhood for 2 years or 3 years. Like that just happened. And if that happens again, I want to make sure that this is a place that I'm it's great to plan to go to Montenegro and plan to go here and plan to go there, but some years, or maybe you have an injury or something happens and
Mhm.
you can't do that. To me, I just was really like careful to pick a place that I was like, all right, if we get stranded here, obviously we'd like to travel, but it'll be fine.
That is very true. I mean, hopefully we never go through anything like that again, but you never know. And even as you said, what if it's an illness, right? What if, I don't know, somebody, hopefully not, but I mean, we break hips, we have knee problems, we have all that. And if you're out in bed for a couple of months and then can't leave home for a few more months after that, and then just getting out to the corner is a trip and back, like
Mhm.
you do want to make sure that you're in a place that you are going to enjoy as best you can and not feel like you're stuck in a closet or claustrophobic or anything. Because
Right.
I do find that it's a lot like across Europe. Europe is designed for outdoor living,
Mhm.
right? People come home, the homes, apartments generally are quite small, especially the older ones. And because people are just there to sleep. They're there, they sleep, they get up in the morning and they're out. They're going to work, they're going to school, they're meeting their friends for a coffee, they're going to the beach, they're going to play sport, they're going like whatever it is they're doing.
Right.
And so homes weren't designed to be big, apartments weren't designed to be big because
Mhm.
people didn't spend a lot of time there. Not like in North America where if you have under 2,000 square feet, like that's tiny. You need at least
Right.
3,000. Like, and that's crazy huge in Europe.
Mhm. Yeah,
Mhm.
absolutely. And like you said about sports too, it's just it's common to have a gym in your home or to have gym equipment in your home, like in the US and maybe in Canada too. I don't know. Or to like, we had a really big backyard with a trampoline in it and, things like that. But here I was like, all right, if we're going to be in apartment, we got to live near a park. We live near a park. We live near a pool, a public pool. You know what I mean? Like I just didn't, because I know we're not going to be, we have an apartment, we don't have a yard. There's no trampoline. So again, you just kind of think about it's different than when you take a vacation, when you're moving somewhere. To me, I really wanted to make sure that we kind of had our bases covered as much as I could. Obviously, you can't think of everything.
Of
And then the other
course.
big thing for me was I really wanted a building with an elevator that worked, that like seemed new and functional.
Hmm.
And I'm so glad because when I had knee surgery, like if I'd lived on a second floor walk up, even then the elevator breaks sometimes, and I did have to walk up, and it was awful. So that's another thing. Like when you're going abroad to live, you don't just want to think not just about the best weather, but also about your best health.
Mm, definitely. Lots of things to consider with the home environment. And how did you find, like, did you get your driver's license there, or and how was that process? Did you transfer it over? Did you have to take a test, or do you still just use your US license?
So we're still in the process. So in
Okay.
Portugal, if you're under 60, you don't have to change your license. And
Okay.
you have up to 2 years to do it, and then you don't have to take the test. So we are
Okay.
changing them, but we just didn't rush into it. So, but I still have my US license, and my husband is changing his license, and then we're going to change mine. So we'll have them both done before 2 years. But I drive here all the time, and it's fine. I mean, I did have to learn how to drive in a roundabout, which is like a traffic circle.
Hmm.
And I actually like just looked it up on YouTube, how to drive in a roundabout, because I didn't know which lane I was supposed to be in. And my car is got a lot of scratches on it. We got well, we didn't get a new car, it was a used car, but it looked brand new, like immaculate, perfect. And I'm very lucky. I haven't had any scratches or scrapes with other vehicles. But I've
Okay.
had a few run-ins with parking garages because they are so narrow, and they have these little, like, you go down a big hill and around a loop and a curve, and there's cement on either side. And, I had a busted knee. Like, I didn't have a choice. If we were going to go somewhere and I needed to get there, I needed to drive. So I just had to learn how to do it.
Right. And I mean, it sucks in a way, but they're just scratches on a car. Like,
They're just scratch, and it still
it just,
works. And the other thing
yeah.
is that Portugal is not like, unless you live in Lisbon, it doesn't have very good public transportation. So it's kind of
Okay.
not a typical European country in that way. You kind of pretty much need to have a car to live here. There are people that do it without, but it's tough.
Okay.
And so it's a lot more of a car culture here than I think people expect when they move to Europe. And some people get really frustrated by that because they want the car-free life.
Right.
And it's really tough to have that here.
Well, that's really good to know. I didn't realize that. I thought it was
Because the
a lot more
train
like the rest of Europe.
no, the trains are so slow. Like, it takes us an hour to drive into Lisbon.
Hmm.
The buses here are pretty good. The public bus, or they have private buses. It takes an hour and like 10 minutes for the bus ride. It's over 2 hours by train.
Oh, that's
Yeah.
not
And then
good.
Porto, which is only like a maybe 2.25 hour drive from here, is like a 5 hour train ride.
Wow.
And there's no bus that goes direct from our town to Porto. There are tons of buses that go direct to Lisbon. So
Hmm.
it's fine if I want to go into Lisbon and I don't have a car, I can just go to take the bus. But if I want to go literally anywhere else in the country, a lot of times you have to take the bus into Lisbon, which is like an hour south, and then go 3 hours north to Porto is weirdly faster than just going direct from here to Porto. So it's a frustrating thing, and hopefully they'll work on it. But if you're living in Portugal or thinking about moving to Portugal, you probably aren't going to be happy with the car-free life unless you're in
Okay.
Lisbon. Yeah.
Right. Right. Well, that's really, really good to know, because then that's something that people need to budget for, right?
Hmm.
Do they choose to bring their car over, which I'm sure in most cases probably not worth it. But then the budget to buy a car there, and then I'm assuming, because I have the car-free lifestyle,
Yeah.
I'm assuming then there's still like the insurance, registration, all of that stuff similar to requirements anyway, similar to North America, that those expenses they need to consider as well on top of just the vehicle purchase.
Yeah. And gas is way more expensive here. So gas right now has come down since we've lived here. It's like 6 or 7 US dollars a gallon.
Wow.
And it was like 8 when we got here. So
Oh
it's
my
like
gosh.
it cost me like €100 to fill my tank up, or 80, depending on how low it is. So that's
Right.
like $100 to fill up your tank. And now we live in a pretty small town, and so most of where I go is really close. And so I don't burn a lot. And we do work, but I either work from home or our office is like 5 minutes away. So none of that's a lot of driving. But if we go anywhere else in Portugal, they also have a lot of tolls here. So if you want to go somewhere in 30 minutes, you take the toll road. And if you don't take the toll road, it's going to take you an hour. And so, but it costs, I mean, like where my doctor is that I go to for most of our medical stuff, I think it's €10 round trip just in tolls.
Wow.
Yeah. So that's definitely more expensive than in the US. Tolls and
Hmm.
gas. Now, car insurance was €300 for the whole year. That's like $350 a year. So that's way cheaper.
Right.
The insurance in general here is cheaper than in North America, or at least US. And so yes, I find driving here pretty easy. I have lived in New York. I grew up in Philadelphia, so I've driven in cities before. I've driven in Lisbon. It's not my favorite thing to do, but I've done it. I've driven on these little narrow streets, and we bought a pretty big car because we're all really tall. So my husband is 6'4", my son is 13, and he's almost 6 feet. So we couldn't get one of these teeny little like toy cars. Like we went to the
Hmm.
dealership and I was like, we need a car that this giant teenager can sit in the back seat and fit his feet in. I mean, that was like literally how we picked out a car. I'm like, go sit in the back, honey. Can you put your feet in? And so there was one car on the whole lot like that. So I'm like, that's what we got. So we have a station wagon, and it's a VW Passat. It's a long car. It's not that wide,
Mm.
but I mean, we drive it in Lisbon. It's fine.
Well, and that's part of adjusting, right?
Yeah.
Like you do adjust to that, but it is again, it's a consideration that
Mhm.
people need to think about because you're right. A lot of people think, oh, everywhere in Europe is car
Yep.
free and not quite it obviously like rural and things like that, but generally all towns are connected and you can go car free, but that is not the case, so you need to think
Mhm.
about which is more important. Do you want to be car free or are you more destination specific with those wants that
Yeah.
when people are thinking about relocating?
Mhm.
Definitely. And what about things like um, banking and grocery shopping? I know two totally different things, but I just wanted to touch base on both of those. Do you have Portuguese bank account, or you just
Mhm.
have?
Yeah,
Okay, so you
you
have
have
that.
to have a Portuguese. Well, if you're getting like moving here to live here, you need to have a Portuguese bank account. And so, but so it's already harder now to set that up than it was even in 2 years ago when we started the immigration process. So I don't really know what it's like for people coming now to get a bank account, but we have a bank account. It's fine. We use Wise to transfer funds, which a ton of people use.
Yeah.
Our business is still based in the US, and so all of our clients still pay us in dollars, and so we're transferring money over here
Mhm.
for our living expenses from our US account, business account. Um, so yeah, banking is, I mean, part of it is just when you live in a place for a long time, once you get established, or if you're born there, you're not dealing with the bureaucracy that often.
Right.
Right? Like, because everyone's like, "Oh, bureaucracy in Portugal is terrible." And I'm like, "Well, it's not great, but I haven't heard of anybody who was in a country who's like, oh, the bureaucracy in this country is great."
It's
Like
it's
it's just
terrible in every country. If you were doing the opposite, leaving a country
right.
in Europe and going to the States or Canada, you'd be like, "Oh my gosh, this is terrible." I mean,
Yeah, it's
I've
just
lived in
bureaucracy
5 countries. It's the
sucks.
same
Yeah.
everywhere. It's bureaucracy and things are slow and documents and paperwork and it is the same everywhere. It's the test of your patience.
Yeah, and if one country's good at, oh, this is easy here, well, then some other thing's going to be hard there. So,
Exactly.
so to me, banking is, I mean, it's fine. Once you have your account set up, we have, debit cards and it's not a
Yeah.
big deal, right? And, um, groceries, we live in a pretty big town, and so there's like 5 different major grocery stores within 5 minutes of my house by car. And and that's another myth I would say that I found about Portugal, and I don't know if you have this in Spain. But that's another thing I think about living also versus like the vacation life. Like there's a lot of, oh, we just go to the market every day and get our fresh bread and get our fresh this and what am I making for dinner tonight? And nobody lives like that. Like, I mean, some people do, that God bless them if they do, but a lot of us are still, I still have a kid in school. I'm still working. I still go to the freaking grocery store with my car and load up a bunch of, get a week's worth of groceries. And yes, there
Hmm.
is wonderful fresh bread. And some weeks I do get bread a couple times a week, and other weeks I get the bagged stuff because it's a busy week and I don't have time to go to the store 3 times. And I don't yet we have a beautiful farmers market in our town. Some weeks I make it, other weeks I just go to the grocery store and buy stuff at the grocery store because that's just what I have time to do.
And that's reality because that's life. You're living there. That again, as you
Right.
said, it's you're not on vacation. When we're on vacation, we have all day to do stuff and do things. But when you've got work and kids and household stuff that needs to be taken care of and just life, family, friends, it is it is completely different. And it's great when we can go to those markets.
Mhm.
I try to, but I'm the same way. I'm the same. I don't always get to the market, and it's nice when I can, but other times I just got to go to the grocery store. I got so much to do. I'm just going to grab
Right.
stuff, one stop,
Exactly.
and that's it. I'm good for a bit. Yeah,
Mhm.
it makes sense. I mean, unless you live right across the street or a 5 minute walk from it, okay,
Right.
great. You can stop by every time you're going home or whenever it's open if it's not daily. Uh, but
Right.
it's not always possible for to go to the fresh markets all the time.
Yeah.
And so you said so your business is in the United States and your clients and stuff there. So what are you doing for work that is helping you support your lifestyle in Portugal?
So my husband and I have our own company. He worked so we do business valuation and we help companies with uh and some other things, asset valuation, things like that. So he did that for many years before we moved. He was a partner in a firm. And then when we moved here, we uh left he left the firm, and then I had had a series of businesses, and so I have a ton of marketing experience. So I run all of our marketing communications for the company, and he still does the valuation and a lot of the sales, and then we have a CFO also. And we're hoping to add another team member this year. So a lot of I think whatever for us, a lot of his contacts, sorry, my chair is wonky. A lot of his contacts that he's developed over years of business are in the US and especially in Atlanta. So he actually goes back 2 or 3 times a year to sort of go on a press junket. Like he like goes and has lunches and breakfasts, and we usually
Hmm.
have a cocktail hour, we host an event. So he can stay connected with his business contacts there. And then we do a lot of online marketing and stuff like that as well. And we are growing our European um client base, but it's slow. I mean, in most businesses, sales businesses, it takes a couple years to build a really good network. And so we're fortunate that we have a network that we can, not use, but work with as we continue to grow our European presence. So the goal is over time to have it be more of a split, but it's still mostly US right now.
Okay. Well, it's nice to have that where you can expand and still have that core base while you're expanding and moving over.
Yeah.
And so if people were interested in getting in touch with you, whether it's for business related stuff or for some more information about Portugal, or maybe starting business in Portugal and helping that way, where is the best place for them to get in touch with you?
So I'm on all the socials, LinkedIn, Facebook. I also have my own podcast called Global Professionals in Portugal, which is about people who live and work in Portugal from around the world. So if people want to learn more about that, they can, and that's all free content, and it's interviews and stories about people. Some people are business owners, some people are employees, all different ways people can work here and make a living here. But it's Portugal specific.
Mhm.
And yeah, I'm on socials, mostly LinkedIn and Facebook. We run a local networking group for professionals as well for this region of Portugal called the Silver Coast. So I have a group called Silver Coast Professionals. So part of how we're building our network here is getting out and meeting other professionals. And so it's something I enjoy doing, and I did in my previous career anyway. So it's been fun.
Well, perfect. And we will make sure to have links to everything in the show notes. And I just want to say thank you very much for joining us today and sharing your experience in Portugal and those things that really kind of surprised you. So other people will hopefully not be surprised by them and take those things into consideration.
Thank you so much for having me, and it was great to meet you. And if people comment with questions and tag me or whatever, I'm happy to be of service if I can.